Hey, if you look up Jim's Art Studio, they have this beautiful Ukrainian sunflower. It's absolutely worth checking out. All the profits are going to go to help Ukrainian charity, so please check it out. It'll be great. All the links will be below in the description and probably here in the picture. But yeah, go help them out. Ukrainians are going through hell right now.
This Organized Chaos video is brought to you by Jim's Art Studio. Jim's Art Studio is an online store that allows access to prints that you can use for most anything, obviously as just a picture, or as a wallpaper, or as a bookmark, or anything you can think of. You can find Jim's Art Studio at etsy.com/shop/Jim's Art Studio. This video is also brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you.
Well, it feels weird to return this series more to its roots. Sure, I compare movies under this series now, but it's weird going back to just looking at the studios themselves and how they are treating the properties. But there's a lot to say about the current state of the two big comic book movie studios and where they stand now, and ask who truly has the better possible future now, and why DC might be in the best position, and what there is to say about Justice League.
Well, I knew you didn't bring me back because you like me.
I don't. Not.
Before I get too far, I know Marvel is really Disney and DC is really Warner Brothers, but I'll call them Marvel and DC for simplicity's sake. DC wanted a big cinematic universe to compete with Marvel, and rather than take a few years to develop right, they tried to force everything together as fast as possible. The result was Batman v Superman as the second movie in the DCEU, which massively underperformed. So Warner Brothers needed to change gears up with Justice League. Except Justice League was already well into production because they were rushing the whole thing way too fast. They threw a ton of money at Joss Whedon to get him to change the movie, but Zack Snyder and Whedon have drastically different styles of direction, and the end result was a Frankenstein's mess of a movie.
They have like a rhythm that I haven't quite been able to... Like brunch. Like, what is brunch?
Marvel, on the other hand, played to fan expectations and subverted them perfectly by concluding the Infinity Saga with Infinity War and Endgame, the end of a 23-movie-long story that was exciting and surprisingly satisfying. So what we have now is essentially a general audience with two very different views on these brands. Right now, the general audience largely feels that Marvel can do no wrong. Meanwhile, they view DC as tainted and can largely only do wrong. However, a strong argument can be made that this puts DC in the best place artistically. Why? Well, let's look at Marvel's place right now. Marvel has now released 27 movies in the MCU, from Iron Man to Spider-Man No Way Home. 27 movies that are largely pretty good. That's not just my opinion, it's also the opinions of critics and general audiences. But what that also does is set a standard for Marvel. This is a huge movie franchise now. In fact, it's quite literally the biggest movie franchise ever. The whole project started as a crazy idea by Kevin Feige that honestly, the big studios weren't interested in. So he moved Marvel resources away from comic books into movies and produced the first Iron Man and The Incredible Hulk. With the buzz around the post-credits scene in Iron Man and the overall box office of that movie, The Incredible Hulk honestly didn't do very well in many respects. It became clear that this idea of a shared movie universe could work. It's easy to look back at what Marvel set up and see the end result and think that Marvel played it safe the whole time. But it really didn't. It all started on a huge gamble, and it paid off big. Disney saw Marvel potential and bought it. And of all its big purchases in the recent years, it is without a doubt the one it's most happy about. But now, it's completed its core original story. Iron Man and Black Widow are dead. Captain America is a super old man who's passed his mantle to one of his best friends. We also have Kate Bishop and Yelena, set up to be new Hawkeye and Black Widow. And it seems like Jane Foster's Thor, She-Hulk, and Ironheart are all on the way. Plus many already established characters, plus many completely different characters. Marvel has found itself in reset mode. It's largely done a good job with this, but it also means Marvel and Disney will be very focused on playing things fairly safe. The formula makes money, so they'll introduce a whole bunch of characters and bring them all together for the big crossover movie to fight a big bad and rinse and repeat. From a business perspective, Marvel's in a great place. Even a movie like Eternals, which I enjoyed a great deal, but objectively was less well received in the box office and by critics, but did very well on Disney+. A sequel is not out of the question for Eternals, and Disney would likely back that move, not because the first movie did so well, but because Kevin Feige and Marvel are proven brands. What this also means is that while Marvel has talked about R-rated movies, they haven't done it yet. They may in the future, but the reason they hesitate is because they have a proven formula. Sure, they might take a risk with a property, but even that is less of a risk because part of what Marvel has done to succeed is take lesser characters and make them A-list. Iron Man was a B-list Marvel hero before the MCU. After the MCU, he is probably the second most popular Marvel character, only to Spider-Man. And Marvel has done this so much. Introduce a character, literally any character. That character is going through a hard time. The character has some sort of severe character flaw. An element from that character's past comes back and forces the character to face that element. Character faces a dark past and becomes a hero. Boom! A new hero is now in the Marvel catalog, ready for the next Avengers movie. These movies will have a semi-heavy dose of humor, but rarely enough to distract from the serious elements. It will also be fairly family-friendly, meaning PG-13. The movies are made with largely the same crews, and unless you have a director like James Gunn, many of the movies will largely look very similar, done with the same effects and people. You might counter with how No Way Home took a chance and brought in alternate universe Spider-Man. Unfortunately, it's still well in Marvel's safe space. Marvel literally has proven it can make any character work, even alternate universe characters. Marvel, in business, is in great shape, and artistically, pretty much locked in place. It's not that I can't take artistic risk, but it's much harder for them than it is for the other franchise we're about to talk about. So, how about DC? DC started clearly wanting to copy the Marvel idea, but only if it was successful. When Iron Man came out, DC was in the middle of their Dark Knight trilogy, and it was clear early on that Christopher Nolan wouldn't be interested in turning that into a shared universe. And since Marvel had yet to fully show that the shared universe would be a hit, DC was fine going with Nolan's approach. But to hedge their bet alongside the Dark Knight trilogy, they also produced Green Lantern and announced that that would start their shared universe. But when that movie was a critical and financial bomb, they quickly did all they could to hide the fact the movie even existed. Uh-oh! So, instead, they put their faith into Man of Steel, the Christopher Nolan-produced Superman reboot, which, as I've said many times, is pretty good but incredibly flawed movie. The movie came out with mixed reaction from critics and a decent but not huge box office. DC decided to move forward. The Avengers came out a year before Man of Steel and quickly became one of the biggest movies in history. So DC moved on with a Man of Steel sequel, with the director of Man of Steel, Zack Snyder, driving the movie forward, and Nolan's involvement becoming minimal. It was decided this sequel would co-star Batman, and Ben Affleck was cast in the role, which was a casting many disliked, including myself to be honest. However, he proved me wrong, and he ended up doing a solid job playing the character. That will be all the praise I have for Batman v Superman. Another movie I've discussed ad nauseum. In an attempt to make a movie as not Marvel as possible, it became one of the darkest, most self-important, and completely humorless pieces of media ever made. The movie bombed critically and underperformed at the box office. It made almost $900 million, which blows away most Marvel Studios movies, but with the advertising budget they blew out for the movie and the amount they promised their investors, it ended up just making the movie a bomb. DC surely thought it had an Avengers-level hit by putting Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman in one movie. And honestly, they should have. Instead, the movie massively underperformed Iron Man 3, much less the Avengers. However, a couple months after Batman v Superman, Suicide Squad came out. It was a critical bomb, but actually did quite well at the box office, overperforming expectations. Then, in the summer of next year, Wonder Woman was released. A massive hit by pretty much any metric. Even with the underperformance of Batman v Superman, they were well into the development of Justice League with Zack Snyder at the helm. What Wonder Woman and Suicide Squad showed DC is that comic book movies can sell, but Snyder's vision may not be the best approach. This becomes very tricky since Justice League is well into production by this point, and Snyder's 100% at the helm of that one. It is arguable what exactly happened. What is known is that Snyder suffered an ultimate tragedy when his daughter committed suicide. He stepped down from Justice League, and Joss Whedon, who directed the Avengers, took over. The two are massively different filmmakers. The dark, humorless aesthetic of Snyder is nothing like the bright, quirky aesthetic of Whedon. The resulting movie was a massive bomb for DC. Since then, DC has continued to make movies set in the DCEU universe, and they've been largely critically liked movies. However, the DC movies have underperformed at the box office since Justice League, with one exception being Aquaman. And this is a strong indication that the brand overall is fairly damaged. When Eternals does a solid job outperforming Shazam, you know these franchises are in very different places. But something else also happened since Justice League. The movies have largely become better. Plus, throughout Marvel's huge success and DC's losses, there was something that happened that may give DC the advantage going forward. On July 20th, 2018, Disney fired Guardians of the Galaxy director James Gunn from the third Guardians of the Galaxy movie because of past offensive tweets that the director had already publicly apologized for years before this. These tweets re-entered the limelight because of right-wing activist Mike Cernovich deciding to use them in a campaign to get Gunn fired. DC was quick to grab Gunn. On October 9th, 2018, they announced he would be in charge of the Suicide Squad sequel, and he essentially would be allowed to do whatever he wanted with the movie. In March of 2019, it was announced that Gunn would be back to direct Guardians 3, and it was also eventually announced that he would direct the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. However, the damage was done. Don't get me wrong, it's excellent that Gunn is back to do more Guardians content, but before he left, he was given the responsibility by Kevin Feige of managing the cosmic aspect of the MCU, meaning stuff like the Eternals was previously supposed to have more involvement from him. This would also likely have included the upcoming Fantastic Four movies. The point being is that James Gunn is one of the most creative voices under the Marvel banner. He seemed capable of making great movies even under strict supervision from the studio. In fact, he seemed to relish working with the limitations. But now he's made his Suicide Squad movie, and it was easily the best movie in the entire DCEU. And yes, it did have a disappointing box office, but it was also released during a little pandemic you may have heard of, and it was also released on HBO Max, which undoubtedly affected the box office. I'll go ahead and confess I didn't see it in theaters, but I did watch it a couple times on HBO Max and thought it was great. Not only that, but now Gunn is also doing a Suicide Squad spin-off series about the character of Peacemaker, which is an unexpected pick for a spin-off series, but it's also turning out to be very awesome. Not only that, but DC has now released 2 R-rated movies and a very R-rated HBO Max series, while Marvel is still talking about Deadpool 3, but nothing solid has been established. That's why, right now, DC may very well be in the best position for movies for the first time since the cinematic universe has started. Marvel is doing great, and because of that, they're going to be very careful about rocking the boat too much. However, DC is largely a failure. That means they are likely to do anything to get some new eyes on their movies. James Gunn is a proven powerhouse in the superhero genre. He knows how to make creative, artistic movies while under the watchful eye of a studio. DC seems pretty much willing to do whatever he wants. The only reason Peacemaker exists is because James Gunn wrote it because he was bored during COVID lockdown, and DC gave it the green light. DC is almost certainly more willing to give creators more control of their projects to allow for the best movie. So looking strictly at money, Marvel dominates, no question. But because DC has been so thoroughly beaten, it has a chance to really rise up. I mean, where else can it go? Because there's very little further DC has to fall. But it also has so much opportunity to rise. Marvel might be scared to be a little too risky, but that might end up being DC's preferred option to take. The Batman will be out soon and looks great. The Flash will be out later in the year and has a lot of potential. DC has some great potential behind it. Only time will tell if they take the risk Marvel will be afraid to jump at. This whole cinematic universe thing started because Kevin Feige and Marvel was willing to take a big risk while DC was too focused on playing it safe. Now Marvel is in no position to take risk, and DC's best bet is to take some risk. Time will tell if DC chooses to take the right risk. Oh, and I didn't forget Zack Snyder's Justice League. It doesn't really play into anything. The fact that it was ever completed is just a result of HBO Max wanting content, and their options were limited in the middle of the pandemic. Having a movie largely done that Snyder could just finish was easy content for them, and honestly nothing more.
They think order and chaos are somehow opposites and try to control what won't be.
I used to fuck guys like you in prison.